The wind cut through the narrow market aisles like a serrated blade. It carried the scent of frozen earth and damp stone, forcing the few remaining villagers to pull their heads low and hurry toward shelter. Mia stood at the edge of the square, watching the gray light fade against the rows of empty stalls. Near the corner, Agnes sat hunched over a collection of unfinished baskets. The wicker was brittle, snapping under the slightest pressure. Agnes reached out, her fingers searching for a tool that was no longer within her grasp. Her hands swept across the rough surface of the cart, missed the handle, and brushed against the freezing stone of the wall. She paused, her breath hitching in the frigid air, before trying again. Her fingers moved with a rhythmic, desperate intent, but the reeds remained tangled and unshaped. The pile of unsold goods beside her grew heavy with frost. Every movement she made was slow, labored, and ultimately futile. Mia watched from the shadows of a nearby stall. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the sharp whistle of the wind through the eaves. Agnes fumbled once more, her hand trembling as it hovered in the empty space. Mia stepped forward. Her boots crunched against the frost-covered ground, a sharp sound that cut through the whistling wind. She did not call out. She reached down, her fingers closing around the cold wooden handle of the tool Agnes had been searching for. She knelt, bringing her level down to the woman's hunched frame, and pressed the tool firmly into the calloused palm. Agnes stiffened, her hand closing instinctively around the object. Mia did not pull away. She reached into her pocket, fingers brushing against the rough skin of a small, dried apple she had saved from her own breakfast. She took the woman's hand again, guiding it to the fruit, and placed the apple into her trembling grip. Agnes froze, her sightless eyes shifted, turning toward the sound of Mia's breathing. Agnes parted her lips, her voice a thin, dry whisper. "Who is there?" Mia remained still, her hand lingering on the woman's wrist. Mia stood up, her shadow falling across the cart. Mia gripped the wooden handles of the cart. They were slick with ice and bit into her palms. She braced her feet, leaned forward, and pushed. The wheels did not turn at first. They were locked into the frozen ruts. She shifted her weight, gritted her teeth, and shoved again until the wood groaned and the cart lurched forward. The path ahead was a narrow, winding lane between stone walls that funneled the wind into a constant, howling gale. Every step became a test of endurance. The weight of the cart pulled at her shoulders, dragging her back, while the wind pushed against her chest. She kept her head down, watching her boots navigate the uneven, frost-slicked cobblestones. Her breath came in ragged, white plumes. The muscles in her upper back burned, a dull, throbbing ache that grew with every yard she gained. She did not stop. She could not. The cart rattled over loose stones, the sound echoing. She focused on the rhythm of her own movement. Push, step, breathe, repeat. The cottage door creaked open, revealing a space that held the same chill as the air outside. Mia guided the woman inside, the floorboards groaning under their combined weight. She navigated the small room by the dim light filtering through the window, finding the hearth piled with cold ash. She knelt, her fingers working quickly to stack dry twigs in a pyramid. She struck a flint, the spark catching on the tinder with a sharp hiss. A thin thread of smoke rose, then a flicker of orange light licked at the wood. Mia fed the flames, blowing gently until the fire caught and began to crackle, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. The room warmed, the biting air receding into the corners. Agnes moved toward the hearth, her hands outstretched, searching for the heat. She turned her head, her sightless eyes finding the space where Mia stood. She reached out, her fingers tracing the line of Mia's jaw and the curve of her cheek. The skin of her fingertips was rough, but her touch was light. "You have the warmth of the sun in your hands," Agnes murmured. The words hung in the quiet room, grounding Mia. She stood there, the heat of the fire soaking into her skin, her shoulders finally relaxing. Mia stepped out of the cottage as the first flakes of snow drifted down, dusting the frozen ground. The air bit at her skin, but she moved with a new, steady rhythm. She walked toward the village square, her eyes scanning the familiar lanes. Near the cobbler shop, she stopped. Old Thomas was not hunched over his workbench. Instead, he stood outside in the biting wind, his hands working a wire cutter against a broken fence section. He pulled the wire taut, twisted it around a post, and secured it for his neighbor. He did not look for payment. He simply moved to the next loose board. Mia continued forward, her boots crunching on the hardening frost. Near the edge of the square, she saw Benny. The shepherd boy sat on a stone bench, his hands holding a piece of bread. He broke it in half, extending the larger portion toward a stray dog that had been shivering in the shadows. The dog took the food, its tail giving a single, tentative wag. Benny watched, then stood and walked toward the center of the square. Mia stood still, observing the scene. The village was shifting. Mia entered the market square, her hands empty, but her eyes tracked the movement across the stalls. The baker stood by his oven, the heat radiating outward. He pulled a loaf from the stone, the crust steaming in the frigid air. A traveler, hunched and shivering, approached the stall. The baker did not wait for a coin. He placed the warm bread directly into the traveler's hands. The man stopped, his shoulders dropping as he broke off a piece. Nearby, a group of village children moved in a line toward the edge of the woods. They carried empty sacks that quickly filled with fallen branches and dry kindling. They did not play or run. They worked with a focused, rhythmic pace, returning to the square to stack the wood in neat, heavy piles. The market, once a place of isolated commerce, had become a hive of activity. Every stall owner was now engaged in a task that served someone else. A woman swept the path for a neighbor, while another hauled water for the elderly. Mia moved through the center of the square, watching the deliberate flow of people. The village was no longer a collection of separate lives. It was a single functioning machine of support. Mia reached the center of the square and stopped by the town well. The stone rim was covered in a thick layer of frost, but the space around it was crowded. Villagers were no longer moving in isolation. They stood in lines, passing heavy wool blankets from hand to hand, folding them into neat stacks. Others arrived with armfuls of firewood, dropping the logs into designated piles with a rhythmic thud that echoed against the surrounding buildings. A man signaled to the group, and they adjusted their positions, creating a clear path for those carrying the heaviest loads. They were sorting, counting, and organizing, their movements synchronized to maximize the heat and shelter available for the village. Mia watched as a woman handed a thick quilt to a neighbor, who immediately took it to a family huddling near the wall. The collective effort turned the square into a hub of deliberate, shared survival. No one stood idle. No one looked away. The biting chill remained, but the crowd moved with a heat that seemed to radiate from their shared purpose. They were no longer a collection of struggling souls. Mia felt a hand rest firmly on her shoulder. Her mother stood beside her, watching the villagers move with steady, practiced rhythm. The cold air bit at their faces, yet neither turned away. Mia looked at the piles of wood, then at the hands passing blankets, and finally back to her mother. The words her mother had spoken about the candle returned, not as a thought, but as a physical demand. It was not a single flame to be guarded in isolation, but a spark intended to be passed from one palm to the next, growing stronger with every transfer. Mia understood. She stepped away from the edge of the crowd, her boots finding purchase on the frozen earth. She walked to the largest stack of wood near the well. She bent down, her fingers digging into the rough bark of the kindling. She gathered a heavy bundle, the weight pressing into her chest as she straightened. She did not look back at the crowd. She turned toward the narrow lane leading to the edge of the village, where the houses were still dark and cold. With the bundle held tight against her, she began to walk, her pace quick and deliberate. The cycle was no longer a concept. It was the weight in her arms. The wind howled through the eaves of the houses, carrying needles of ice that stung the skin. Night after night, the temperature plummeted, turning the village paths into sheets of glass. Yet, the darkness never fully claimed the streets. Mia moved from door to door, her hands calloused and her pace steady. She was not alone. Everywhere she turned, the patterns of the previous day repeated with renewed intensity. A neighbor cleared a path for the elderly. Another brought a bucket of water to a house where the pipes had frozen solid. The work was quiet, devoid of fanfare, but it was constant. The village had become a network of small, interlocking efforts that defied the severity of the season. Snow piled high against the walls, burying fences and doorways, but the paths remained clear. Smoke rose from every chimney, a steady gray plume against the white sky. The winter was harsh, unrelenting in its reach, but it could not break the rhythm the people had established. They moved with a shared understanding. anticipating needs before they were voiced. The cold remained, but the village stayed bright, sustained by the persistent, quiet work of its people, who had learned that the only way to survive the frost was to hold the warmth together.